Hello all my Kenn fans, PapaKenn here, and welcome to episode 21 of Discovering Steven Universe. The episode I'm going to be talking about today is Joking Victim, which, if you've seen the episode, I would hope you've seen the episode before you watch this, but, puns, which I'll get into later. But, I decided to change things up just a little bit in the format here, just because it makes more sense, overall, I think, and some other people have mentioned this in the past as well, but I'm going to give you my overall thoughts here in the beginning. I found the episode to be okay. It's definitely not one of the strongest episodes, but overall, I would say it's okay for what it does, which, let's expand that a little bit by going into my favorite parts of this episode, starting with the accident, which, I don't know, it just seemed, it admittedly just seemed kind of perfect for all characters involved, and by the accident, what I mean is, after Steven rushes into the donut shop and, gets Coke, or, soda everywhere, and Lars slips. And really, everything that happens feels just so incredibly appropriate for all of the characters involved. Steven is Steven, so it's he just kind of fits any role needed in this kind of situation, which it happens to be. He's the one, slurring, unable to speak properly because of the fire salts. But then Lars taking a spill and then clearly over-exaggerating the pain he's in, and essentially taking advantage of Sadie, which I don't know, I might expand on this a little bit more later in the episode, or maybe I'm not sure if I want to withhold my judgment. We'll see, but just that scene in particular I found pretty enjoyable, just in my opinion, from for the sake of observation. And my second favorite part of this episode was the VHS tape, and just more than the tape itself, which was admittedly pretty entertaining. Mr. Smiley doing the sing-along informative training session, which was weird. For anyone that's a little bit older than me, is that actually a thing? I've seen informative VHS tapes and they were incredibly corny, but back in the 80s and stuff, did some of them actually used to sing the instructions? I would love to know that, if that's actually a thing. Of course, if it is, it's probably only in the US, but still. But more than just the VHS tape itself, Steven's legitimate enjoyment of the tape and everything that was going on, the way it's portrayed through those next few scenes, just the contrast of Steven seemingly getting more and more into it as it goes along, which, I mean, they don't really say exactly how long the tape takes, which I hope wouldn't be too long. But Sadie is just she's slowly falling more and more asleep and getting frustrated, obviously. So it's just, again, it's the legitimate enjoyment of Steven is just such a stark contrast to that. I couldn't help but laugh, just because I feel like I kind of observe that in things between myself and others, just, more recently, myself and my wife, especially when it comes to certain shows. There's certain shows that I just absolutely love, and when certain moments come up, I'll be like, yeah, and it's I'll be super into it, and then I'll, glance over at her, and she's just like, eh. But, again, the roles can be reversed. It can be something she's really into, and I'm just kind of okay, or I'm distracted on my phone, or playing on my 3DS, something along those lines. So it's just that in particular, I honestly did find it funny. But moving on from there, my next favorite part of this episode definitely has to be the character relationship development for Sadie and Lars. And honestly, I would have to say this is probably my favorite part, or like my top favorite part of this episode, because it's really what the episode feels like it was made for, is further defining these characters and defining their relationship. And so much happens in this episode with those two characters. I mean, a lot of stuff that was kind of assumed. Of course, going into it, I kind of assumed that Lars and Sadie had a relationship, but it's clear that they don't have a defined relationship, but they do care about each other. A lot more of the care is definitely coming from Sadie, but it's not entirely a one-way street. Lars does care for her as well, but he's a lot more immature in regard to how he's able to process that, how he's able to bring himself to show care for Sadie, which we don't unfortunately see much of. I was going to say a lot, but we don't even really get to see much of that in this episode. But the way he reacts and seeing her seeing her upset does inspire a visceral reaction from him, and I feel like that shows more about his character than, well, maybe not more, but it shows a part to his character that sort of shines out despite his actions, which are all pretty freaking negative throughout this episode, admittedly. He definitely isn't, I don't think good guy is the right word, but he's definitely no angel here. Not to say Sadie is, but, you know, there's just the way their personalities work. She sees good in him when us as the viewers can't necessarily. But moving on from there, my next favorite part of the episode was the fire salt and what I call flamethrower Lars section. Just that entire segment of him after eating the fire salt. And I rewatched the episode, and from that moment on, I get this very almost Ren and Stimpy-ish animation feeling from him. I don't know if that makes any sense, but some of the weird and wacky things that happen to the characters in Ren and Stimpy, just the way that Lars reacts, like when he's breathing fire, or he's trying to, or like when he reacts to finding out that Steven was the one that, you know, was responsible for the fire salts. Just something about his animation really reminded me of Ren and Stimpy. In particular, probably the character Ren, because he's definitely the most expressive as far as the facial expressions go. But yeah, there's just like that entire section of the episode was just pure gold, in my opinion. You know, sad that a character is going through pain, but it's hard to feel bad for him when he's, well, given his actions in the episode. But finally, my last favorite part of this episode just had to be Amethyst being Amethyst more than anything. And the funny thing is, it's because of her actions that this episode really takes place at all. Because had she not given Steven the fire salt laced was it chips or fries? I think it was fries. Had she not given him those, he wouldn't have run into the donut shop and caused Lars to slip and all that. So none of what goes on here would have transpired. And at the end of the episode, Steven himself says, like, "You were no help at all," or something along those lines. I may be paraphrasing. And Amethyst is just like, eh. So, I don't know, I found that to be rather interesting, that an episode like this was basically entirely caused, and they seem to call that out in a sense within the episode, by Amethyst, by someone who was really, except for the idea of the fire salts, completely outside the plot of the episode. But yeah, so those are my favorite parts. I do have an annoyance, and my annoyance may be pretty obvious moving into it, but my annoyance with this episode is that it is very, very much a filler episode. Or at least it feels that way to me. Now, as I mentioned earlier, being one of my favorite parts is that what we get here is some real character and relationship development for Sadie and Lars. And I feel like that's the entire purpose of this episode. And that's absolutely fine in and of itself. The thing is that while I do want to learn more about these characters, and again, there's only so much they can do in 11 to 12 minute episodes, but when you go from episodes that are focusing on Steven, the Gems, Connie from time to time, or for at least 2 episodes, it feels awkward to go and then have an episode almost entirely focus on side characters. Not to say it's a bad episode at all. It's just that there's something about my personality. It's like whenever I can sort of detect that something is a filler episode, it just seems to lower the quality for me. Not because it's a bad episode, just because it feels like it breaks the flow. I'm sure that the next episode will be back to, slowly building some of the background elements of the stories and everything. It's just, maybe that's what annoys me about it being filler, is that in some shows, even if it's a filler episode, there's still some elements of real background plot going on, like just tiny little smidgens or small mentions. And I wasn't able to see any of that in both of my viewings of this episode. So yeah, it felt like very much like a filler episode. I do appreciate what it did, but that's just a personal annoyance for me. Now, let me know any of your personal favorites or annoyances with this episode down in the comments down below. I would love to hear what they are. And yeah, that's basically why I feel like this episode was okay. It definitely had some good elements, to say the least, but because of it feeling like / basically completely being a filler episode, it makes it really hard for me to view it as a favorite or as a great episode overall. Again, just me. Let me know your thoughts. Moving on from there, the track of the episode, I would have to say, is the Mr. Smiley's song on the VHS tape. It was just, or maybe the song's called Napkins Are Always Free, I don't know. But it was as silly and corny as it was. It had a charm to it, especially being a child of the a child of the 80s that grew up in the 90s. It's like I got so used to seeing certain things like that, and like these little infomercials where they use these, really cool beats and everything. So yeah, that's definitely the track of the episode for me, was Mr. Smiley's song on the VHS tape. Now, as for my quotes of the episode, I really did have 2, and it's not so much for, well, one is the line itself, and the other is for the reaction that the line inspired. The first of which is in regards to the VHS tape, or the videotape, maybe they call it. Maybe I don't think they use the word VHS at all. But Sadie refers to it as, it's like a DVD shaped like a box. And I love that for 2 reasons. One, again, child of the 80s, grew up in the 90s. VHS tapes were pretty much all we had for years. Even though I grew up in the time of laser discs, no one, well, maybe one person I knew personally actually owned something that could play laser discs. But for the longest time, until DVDs became much more the norm, videotapes were all we had. So to see a cartoon kind of refer to a videotape like that just honestly cracked me up. But the second reason I love it is that it's kind of accurate. Like it's like a DVD shaped like a box. I would have expanded that with, and you also have to rewind it, but that's just a personal thought on my own account. Now, my second quote of the episode for this one, and this is the one that was inspired by the reaction that the line, not for me, but for a character within the show, but when Steven says, "Now, I know we both love Lars," and, you know, not really meaning anything by that, but the way Sadie reacts to how that's said, she's just very like, and it's very, it's a further portrayal of the different reactions that both her and Lars give whenever the idea of a relationship, or it was, I can't remember what episode it was, but a joke about them being married. And yeah, it's just like that reaction from Sadie just really made that line for me, solidified that line in my mind. So yeah, those are my quotes of the episode. Let me know any other quotes that might have been your favorite for this episode. From what I can recall, there were at least a few pretty good ones in this, to say the least. So yeah, let me know some of your favorite quotes in the comments down below. I don't really have any questions or theories for this episode. I mean, maybe, I guess, a theory I'm thinking up off the top of my head would be that, like, Lars and Sadie officially become a couple at some point. That's really about the closest I can get. But otherwise, again, just because of this being a filler episode with no real, like, background plot going on, that's really, I can't really get much from it to inspire, you know, further thought as far as the series goes, other than possibly that they'll officially become a couple. But alright, everyone, let me know your, you know, all of your thoughts about this episode in the comments down below. I would love to hear what you have to say, whether you agree or disagree with my views on this particular episode. Like, do you, even though it's, like, I find it to be a filler episode, do you have strong feelings as to, you know, another way? Do you think it's a really strong episode because of the fact that it doesn't focus just on the gems and Steven? You know, I definitely like to hear your thoughts, and not even justifications, but just your reasons for that. But alright, next time I'm going to be talking about Steven and the Stevens, and what an appropriate time for my monitor to turn off from inactivity is right at the end of the video. But alright, everyone, I'm PapaKenn. Thank you very much for joining me for this episode of Discovering Steven Universe, and I will see you next time for the next video. Until then, Alonzi!